talk about the idea of cost, because I think, no matter how beneficial it is or is not, it's always going to come down to the bottom line. Dana, do you think this is SDDC is a way to cut costs, or is it a better tool that should cost more because it gives you more? I mean, are we moving to a Toyota to save money, or are we moving to a Rolls Royce and we get a much better ride across town?
Well, I would start by saying that we ought to be saving money no matter what. But I also don't want to confuse software defined with open source and with cloud. They're different, they're distinct, and they all seem to be happening at once. And so there is a very complicated tangle of overlapping trends and imperatives for enterprises and service providers as well. But unpacking that a little bit, the costs are going to go down for two big reasons. One, the technology, and then secondly, the marketplace. When you move to OpEx, as we've discussed, you're opening up yourself to be compared apples to apples, orange to oranges to other service providers. And you can start to make rational decisions about what types of workloads you want to retain on premises, perhaps keeping them on their legacy platforms. If it doesn't make sense to rip it off, you don't. But you're able to start saying, well, maybe there's some commodity or context rather than core applications and data sets that I could start to think about moving elsewhere. Maybe that's a cloud model. Maybe it's just colo or managed service provider of some sort, or a hosting approach that you share economically. But if you go to OpEx, you can start to say whether that makes sense or not. And in that marketplace, all those other different types of hosting organizations are going to vie for your business. And we've got some very big, powerful organizations like Google and Amazon that incidentally have business models supported by other types of economic profit and loss centers. So I think that the economics are shifting just as much as the technology. I do think the technology will allow for less facilities and square footage. You're getting more bang out of your buck in terms of that commodity hardware. You're going to use less energy because of that commodity hardware. You're going to go to an OpEx, and so you can charge back across your organization, and you have a better real sense of what your IT costs are, and you can charge people appropriately rather than surprise your CIO at the end of the quarter or your CFO at the end of the year. So all of those things technically are going to create lower costs, but it's the marketplace where the demand for commodity level resources for more and more apps and more data types are going to provide a often downward pressure on price, and therefore a better overall cost for the end user.
Yoram, it sounds like Dana is saying that there is a possibility of cost savings with SDDC. Do you see it as that, or see it as just a better tool that should cost more?
Well, I think the main benefit of software-defined data center are simplicity, scalability, and the ability to use the latest, greatest hardware technology. So if you think about the old model of having hardware-defined data center, then you have to use different components that didn't scale at the same level and were not simple to manage. So simplicity, having automation, is one large benefit. The second benefit is the ability to use latest and greatest technology, and you don't have to make the increment based on the specific hardware that you're using. So I think those are the main reasons to go to software-defined. They also definitely reduce the OpEx, because if you think about cost, the OpEx side is the majority, and by simplifying and automating, you definitely get the cost reduction. I'm not sure about the CapEx, because again, CapEx is a little bit different, and how do you charge for it? I think the opportunity for software-defined is to change the model from, say, a perpetual model, which is the old model for selling into the data center, to more of a subscription model. So I think cost saving, especially on the OpEx side and maybe long-term on the CapEx side, will be there, but the main benefits are not just the cost. It's not all about cost cutting. It's about simplification, it's about scalability, and then the cost will come down the road. But when an organization thinks long-term, definitely they should value the cost saving, especially at the OpEx side.
Alessandro, speaking from a vendor perspective, when someone comes to you and says, well, is this going to save us money? Do you say yes, or do you say, well, maybe, but it's really going to actually offer you more for the same amount of money, or maybe more money?
No, I mean, the bottom line is that you have to save money. Whether you're taking money out of OPEX or capital expenditure, it doesn't matter, but you need to show net savings on the bottom line. Otherwise, everything we do doesn't make sense. They might as well extend the status quo. So you have to save in some dimension, right? So what we're finding out, and again, it's just a partial and limited view because we are a small company, is that a lot of our customers are telling us that the proprietary lockings of certain solutions offset some of the operational savings in agility and flexibility that they might get. So there's a huge tax that particularly the incumbents in the industry are placing on anything virtualized. And also there is a challenge that right now we have virtualization very much in silos. You have the virtual network, you have the virtual storage, you have the different cloud management and virtualization management stacks, but they don't, if you want to virtualize compute, then you need to look for a different solution to virtualize the network or to virtualize storage. They don't necessarily you don't necessarily have a unified, let's say, orchestration system that touches all the components, which adds a lot of complexity. So not only you have to deal with the proprietary lockings, but also with the diversity of virtualization system that you have to teach. Not to mention that I was reading a statistics from Cisco, again, maybe biased, maybe not, but they claim that 60% of the workloads in a data center are still bare metal. So you also have to deal, any virtualization solution has to accommodate the transition or even the permanent existence of bare metal workloads. So there's a tremendous complexity in orchestrating a transition to cloud, and the challenge of proprietary lockings is very questionable at this point. With technologies we have at the level of maturity, that there are real savings. So customers are struggling and are trying to understand the business model for moving to cloud and in general software defined.
Yeah, and Greg, that does bring up the question in terms of cost. It seems like if you're going to really move to the SDDC format, you may be in greater danger of vendor lock-in, and that, you know, today's heterogeneous data center is a crazy patchwork of all sorts of vendors. But if you're going to lay in an SDDC format, it seems like you're going to have to really be focused on one vendor or a couple of vendors that must be interoperable. Yay, nay on the cost issue?
You know what, a couple of points here, James, is that first, you got to remember the golden rule of software-defined anything. And the golden rule of software-defined anything is whoever controls the software-defined controls the gold. If you control the management, if you control the software-defined network, data center, storage, whatever it happens to be, whoever controls that controls the gold.
It sounds like vendor lock-in.
Oh, yeah. I mean, this is, you know, a key question, which is, does software in general, but software defined, actually move or simply abstract the point of vendor lock-in? You can make arguments pro or against it, but I think it's one of those considerations. But here's something to think about. When it comes to lock-in, is vendor or technology lock-in a bad thing? Some will tell you it is, some will tell you it won't. I'd say it goes back to, look, if you're getting a benefit, if you're getting a business benefit out of whatever it happens to be, vendor lock-in, technology lock-in may not be a bad thing. But what I want to go back to is, you know, there's a couple of interesting points made there around cost, okay? Because we hear a lot about whether it's cost or cloud or virtual or software defined or, you know, whatever it happens to be, open source. Usually tends to be around cost because that's a hot button. Usually around CapEx, OpEx, because those are popular buzz terms in the industry. But there's this big thing around perpetual versus subscribe. Whether you're a CapEx, OpEx, it really gets back to is, are you buying it all up front, capital or operating budget, or are you paying as you go? Are you going to buy it? Are you going to lease it?
And OpEx is very fashionable these days.
OpEx is unbelievable fashionable. In fact, it's funny is the industry uses OpEx, CapEx. Some customers do, but you know they tend to talk a little bit different language. But Dana made an interesting point around the OpEx, and I think he's got some interesting themes and ideas there that, you know, the rallying point for the cloud is cut cost, but do you really know it's cheaper, okay? Or software defined, you know, reduce cost, shift to OpEx, you know, it should be savings. How do we know that? Simply saying, I'm going software defined, change my cost. has software defined magically allowed organizations to understand what their costs are? Do all of a sudden they know what the cost of that virtual network, that virtual storage, that virtual machine, of doing a backup or doing an archive? Have they magically all of a sudden overnight figured out what their costs are? So I think, Dana, you mentioned, so they can do that apples to oranges comparison. If I dress up, put a tie on, get some of you to come in with me, I'll bet we could convince many organizations that we can do things cheaper than they could by going to whatever our model is, because I'm betting on the simple fact most organizations don't have the management tools, the insight to understand what their costs are. And I think, Dana, that goes to your point, is that if you can get that information, if you can get that insight of what your costs are, then you can make informed decisions. But in light of that, it doesn't matter whether you're going software defined, hardware defined, cloud, legacy, you're flying blind.
Well, I think...
go ahead, Dan. Yeah, go ahead.
Most companies know what their total cost of IT is. They have to in order to be a business. They've got to come out with a profit and loss statement at the end of the year and the end of the quarter. What they don't know is what portion of that cost is wasted and what portion of that cost should go into a modernization rather than a maintenance funding. So what companies want to do is understand more about what the unique costs are for different resource allocations that support their workloads, whether it's data or applications, and then have a better sense of how to shop, how to be a better buyer, to procure based on a set of requirements, rather than wait till the end of the year comes in, tally up all the bills for IT and say, oh, wow, we're spending 50% of our capital on IT rather than 20% or 10%. So it is about economics. But software-defined, automated, and management and the services, particularly a services orientation and an IT service management model that then leads to a business service management model. We're using ITIL in order to get a handle on what your services are as a bureau, as a broker. These are all part of the same economic question. So we're not just talking about technology transformation, we're talking about the economics of IT transformation, which is an underpinning of the IT of business.
And Dan, I think that's the key.
Economics of business.
I think that's the key thing is, you know, whether software-defined, cloud, virtual, whatever is in the discussion, where the business derives the benefit out of all of this is how do they make that transition to know what their costs are, to know what their overhead are, so they can make those. But it's about a cultural transformation of how they do and deliver and use IT, how they consume it. Are they buying, renting, etc.? Are you hardware defined? Are you software defined? Are you marketing defined? Whatever it happens to be. But that's the key, Dana, is the organizations have to use these tools. The automation is good, but if you don't have the policy, the rules, the processes to implement the automation, you've just bought a new technology and you'll probably use it in old ways.